This episode of Basics with Babish is sponsored by Trade Coffee, an online subscription service that takes the guesswork out of shopping for coffee. Trade has this really great personalization quiz. Just answer some questions, click a few pictures, and you'll get a selection of coffees customized to your tastes and brewing methods. Coffee is roasted to order and sent right to your door. Click the link below to get 30% off your first bag, but for now, let's get down to basics. How many times has this happened to you? You're brewing up a batch of your favorite coffee, everything's going great, birds are tweeting, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and there's no smudges on your windows and the kids are being quiet for once. You take your first big swig of your delectable brew and realize you don't have any coffee cake. Well, let's fix that real quick. First and foremost in the coffee cake ingredient hierarchy is streusel, the lightly spiced, soft yet crunchy, crazy sweet crust piled high atop this otherwise boring cake. So we're going to make a whole lot of it. Into a large bowl goes 8.5 ounces of all-purpose flour, 6 ounces of dark brown sugar, and a nearly heaping teaspoon of cinnamon. Whisk together until homogeneous and no large lumps remain. Add a stick and a half of melted butter and you got yourself some streusel. But I like to add 2 decidedly non-traditional ingredients, so any streusel purists or Germans, please avert your eyes. Whilst I add 2.5 ounces of turbinado sugar and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. The turbinado is going to add some extra crunch and the baking powder is going to help it puff up a little bit and give it some body. Whether you add those 2 bonus ingredients or not, we are pouring in 1.5 sticks or 12 tablespoons of melted unsalted butter, combining with a couple of forks or our bare hands until it reaches that perfect crumbly consistency. Now cover this precious stuff and set it aside while we prepare our cake batter. Maybe taste a few morsels just to make sure it tastes good. Shocker, it tastes great. And just like most cake batters, we are first combining our dry ingredients. Another 8.5 ounces of all-purpose flour, a whopping 2 teaspoons of baking powder for lift, a half teaspoon of baking soda, which is going to help give us a nice deep brown crust, and a full teaspoon of kosher salt or a half teaspoon of table salt. Whisk that together until good and combined, and then bust out your stand mixer. You can do this with a hand mixer, but it's way easier with a stand mixer. First, we're going to cream together our sugar and butter. This is going to help give the cake more structure. So into the bowl goes 6.5 ounces of granulated sugar and 1 stick or 8 tablespoons of room temperature unsalted butter. We're not using any cold ingredients because that's going to help prevent our cake batter from curdling. We're mixing these together at first on low speed and then once they combine, beating on medium-high speed for about 3 minutes until light, pale, and fluffy. Then we're going to scrape down the sides of the bowl and start adding the rest of our wet stuff. Starting with 3 large eggs. Ideally, you want to add these eggs one at a time, beating each egg into the sugar mixture for about 30 seconds, but I was feeling lazy. So as is so often the case on this show, do as I say, not as I do. Then we are adding 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, or if you want little flecks of vanilla in there, vanilla paste, and 1 cup of room temperature sour cream. This is going to bring a nice tang and keep our cake super moist. Beat those into the already beaten egg and sugar mixture that we totally beat together before adding that other stuff for 1 to 2 minutes on medium speed, scraping down the sides of the bowl halfway through to make sure that everybody gets mixed in homogeneously. Then we are sifting in our dry ingredients so as to prevent lumps, especially if you're in New York City where there is currently a flour shortage, and you had to buy flour buried in the bottom shelf of your nearest bodega, and it is for some reason a little chunky. But even if that's not the case, still sift in your dry ingredients and mix on medium-low speed, scraping down the sides of the bowl after about 30 seconds, mixing for an additional 30 seconds until smooth, taking care not to overmix. Now it's time to prep our baking vessel. Usually folks reach for the bundt cake pan or casserole, but I'm gonna go with a loaf pan because I can both spray it down with nonstick spray and then line it with a piece of parchment paper, which is going to give me the ability to get the coffee cake out of the pan without turning it upside down and losing a whole bunch of precious streusel. So we are generously greasing both the pan and the parchment paper and then laying down about half our batter in the pan. Now, I had been watching a little bit too much Great British Baking Show, and I was convinced that my streusel filling was going to sink to the bottom of the pan, so I went for more like 3/4 of my batter before sprinkling in about 1/3 of my streusel. And with every aspect of the streusel, you can really go nuts. You could add add more than a third, you could add half. Just press it down ever so gently into the batter, and then I'm going to use a rubber spatula to sort of shove it away from the edges of the pan, ensuring that it will be encased in the batter and not crack our loaf in half. Then with that done, we're going to top our streusel swirl with the remaining batter. Just remember that I kind of overestimated the sinking ability of my streusel, so only about a quarter of my batter is left. For you should really do half and half, as you shall see. Just spread it over as evenly as possible and press it into the corners and edges to make sure that it is encasing the streusel. And now for the most important step, the streusel topping. This is where you can really go nuts. New York style crumb cake is like 90% streusel. I was a little cautious with my application because I was worried that it would impede my cake's rise, but you can really dump as much as you want on there. Anyway, with our top crumb layer applied and lightly pressed down, this guy is ready for the oven. A 350° Fahrenheit oven with the rack set to its lowest point for 50 to 60 minutes, until it emerges nicely risen, deeply brown, and smelling like the metaphysical concept of brunch itself. And a cake tester, when inserted into the center of the loaf, emerges with only a few moist crumbs clinging to it for dear life. Now, if you are making this for brunch, make sure that you make it the night before, because this guy needs to cool in the pan for 45 minutes before gingerly being removed by virtue of our handy-dandy parchment paper remover handles and allowed to cool completely on a wire rack up to an hour and a half. Resist the urge to cut in early, otherwise you might end up with a dry cake. Now, while it's ever so slightly warm, I like to dust it heavily with powdered sugar. The warmth is going to help the powdered sugar adhere to the crumbs during the violent process of slicing, which we're finally ready to get into. Just grab your unnecessarily long bread knife, line it up like you're trying to sink an 8-ball in the corner pocket, take a deep breath, squeeze the trigger, don't pull it, and bisect your crumbly, delectable loaf. Now, as I mentioned before, I thought my streusel filling was going to sink. It didn't, to the point where I had to very gently Photoshop this video's thumbnail to make the swirl appear more central. Does that make me a bad person? Yeah, kinda. But does that make this a bad coffee cake? Absolutely not. It is moist, it is tender, it is sweet, it is crunchy and crumbly. It is so good that I momentarily forgot that you're supposed to eat it with a fork and knife like a grown-up. But as good as this coffee cake is, it needs something to balance out all the sweetness and decadence. But what could that possibly be? Is it red kidney beans? No. Perhaps a small rechargeable lantern? No. A Christmas ornament celebrating sisterhood? No, that's not it. Oh, yes, of course, coffee. And what better way to procure the coffee to accompany your coffee cake than with today's sponsor, Trade Coffee. Trade has a massive amount of high-quality coffees roasted to order, customized to your preferences, continually evolving to suit your taste. The first 100 people to use the link in this video's description will get 30% off their first match with shipping included. Their online coffee quiz only takes a few minutes. You'll quickly be matched with the roasters and beans that best suit your brewing practices. It's fresh, it's convenient, it's personalized, and it's the best price for the best quality coffee you're gonna find anywhere. Like this delicious little number, El Salvador Santa Rosa, from Onyx Coffee Lab, a medium roast boasting complex notes of green grape, pecan, strawberry, and sugarcane. I hope you guys give it a try, tell them Babs sent you, and get to brewing the best coffee you've ever had.